Welcome, fellow Rotarians and guests, to this important and exciting Rotary meeting. Let's begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to now invite up Rotarian Jesse Schmidt, who will facilitate today's invocation.
I, of course, will use the stairs because nothing that I could do would ever allow me to just jump up onto the stage. So let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for the gift of this day, the beautiful weather. I'd like to thank you for those who prepared the food that we are sharing today and their families. I ask special blessings for those who don't have a meal to share today. During this special time of Passover and Easter, we ask you to be with all those around the world who don't have the freedoms that we do to celebrate faith however we choose. Thank you for those who served today. We ask special blessings upon the sender and his family. In your name we pray. Amen.
Thank you very much, Jesse. I would like to now invite all of our guests or any visiting Rotarians from other clubs to please stand and be recognized. Welcome. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us today. Well, I do see a lot of Rotarians in the crowd that we have not seen in quite some time. Welcome back. And believe it or not, despite this environment we've been in, we have been adding new members at a very, very healthy rate. And like last week, we had some new inductions, and we'll have some more in the weeks ahead. But today, we have two new member inductions to facilitate. The first one, I'd like to invite Pam Hanneman up to introduce Bobby Tibbetts.
Thank you, President Jason. Today I'm excited and pleased to introduce you one of our newest members here, Bobby Tibbetts. Bobby, come on up here. Stand center here. Bobby is a native of Pierce, Nebraska. She grew up on a farm where the family grew crops and raised livestock. It's a place where life lessons were learned and Midwest work ethic was instilled. From there, Bobby graduated from the University of South Dakota with a bachelor's degree in business management and an emphasis in marketing. Following graduation, Bobby moved to San Diego, California, where her love for nonprofit work started as she held a position with the American Cancer Society and gained valuable experience in corporate event management. As every wise Midwestern does, Bobby found her way back to the heartland, where she continued her career focusing on people serving in various positions in human resources with First Premier Bank and Premier Bank Card. In 2012, Bobby began with Sanford Health Foundation and held various leadership positions before ascending to Chief Philanthropy Officer, where she now leads Sanford Health's fundraising arm, overseeing all fundraising strategies and donor stewardship carried out to support the philanthropic mission of the organization. In her role, she helps create the overall philanthropic vision, oversees the foundation budget, and leads the team of development professionals across the Sanford Health enterprise and the Good Samaritan Society footprint, who carry out the day-to-day operations for all fundraising activity. Bobby and her husband Luke, who is Vice President of Business Banking at First Premier Bank, live in Sioux Falls with their son Will and their daughter Ryan. Let's give Bobby a warm welcome to Rotary. Bobby, would you like to share a few comments?
I sure will. I was giving Pam a hard time for somebody who doesn't feel comfortable with public speaking. I'm going to hold it against her for some time for failing to tell me that Senator John Thune was going to be speaking today. So this is actually a perfect introduction and why I wanted to get involved in downtown Rotary, to be able to hear from distinguished leaders, to get to network businesses best and to have an understanding of how I can further this incredible community's agenda, as well as the state and the country. I've been really blessed with some incredible mentors in my life who've always told me to get involved, to give back, to do more. And I think this is a perfect step in the right direction in getting to do that. So thank you so much for the warm welcome. I look forward to being an active member.
Thank you, Pam and Bobby. Welcome to Downtown Rotary. I'd like to now invite up Cindy Peterson, who will induct Brian Mulder.
Brian Mulder, his wife Chrissy, and their family moved to Sioux Falls in the summer of 2008 to join the pastoral staff of Central Church. In the past 13 years, Brian's volunteer community involvement has included serving on the board of directors for Collision, being a youth sports coach, serving on the board of directors for the community outreach, and also serving on the board of directors for Volunteers of America Dakotas, which led to his current position as managing director of community support services. For the past 4 years, Brian has led a dedicated and compassionate staff who provide support to nearly 300 individuals and their families living with intellectual developmental disabilities. He also is part of leading the development team for VOA Dakotas. He and Chrissy have 3 active children, ages 15, 13, and 11, and now are in that season of life where they are attending all of those activities and events. But first and foremost, Brian is passionate about this community and is committed to being involved in the opportunities to which he is led. Please help me welcome Brian Mulder to Downtown Rotary.
Thank you, Cindy. Yeah, when I had the opportunity to be invited to the Rotary, I was able to come check out a few meetings, and the 2 that I've been to was the first one was the B52 mentoring panel discussion that we had here, and then also the State South Dakota Hall of Fame panel that I was able to listen to. And both of those groups mentioned how much having mentors or being a mentor meant in their life. And knowing that Downtown Rotary has an emphasis on that and being part of this group is really what drew me to be part of this and serving this community. So thanks for having me. I look forward to being part of this group. And yeah, thanks again.
Brian, welcome. And again, Bobby, welcome. I have no doubt the 2 of you will be great Rotarians, and we look forward to seeing you at meetings in the future. Well, I said we would have this turned over to Tony and the senator at 12:10, and we are a minute shy of that. Without further ado, I'd like to turn the program over to Tony. Senator, thank you for joining us today. We look forward to this discussion.
Thank you, President Jason, and thank you, Senator Thune, for being with us today. I want to also welcome our Rotarians, both in the room and those that are joining us online. It is great to have a full room again. We were talking before we started here. You can feel the optimism growing in our community and throughout as the vaccination takes hold. So it's exciting to see that. I want to thank those that make programs like today a reality, the Think 3D production team, as well as our other Rotarians. And it's an honor to have not only our senator, but the second ranking member of the Republican Party with us today. We have a lot of issues to cover. It's been quite a year for our country. We're at a pivotal time with a change in administration, so we're gonna jump right in. I told the senator I have 13 issues, and if all goes well, we'll cover a lot of ground here in 50 minutes. I know that you are interested in hearing his thoughts on where we're at and where we're going as a country. So with that, we'll go ahead and dive right in. Senator Thune, I know you were in Texas late last week visiting the border. Share with our Rotarians and guests your experience, and then what could or should be done to rectify what we're seeing there.
Okay, thanks, David, and thanks for the opportunity. It's great to be back at Rotary downtown and to see people face to face. I think the last time we did this, it was virtual, but to your point, as the vaccine makes its way out there, I hope everybody who has the opportunity will get it. It is a game changer. It gives you a lot more confidence in going out and resuming your normal activities, your normal life. So hopefully people will get that. I did make a trip to the border. We went down, we were 18 of us senators, and spent a lot of time with the Border Patrol, with the State Patrol, Texas, Port of Entry folks, community leaders, visited some of the facilities where they're currently housing some of the unaccompanied children that are coming across the border. And it really has escalated. I mean, it's out of control. The immigration issue is not a new one for us. It's one we've dealt with through multiple administrations, but this is on a pace right now to where they're literally setting new records every day in terms of the number of people coming across. And I think a lot of that has to do with the message, the signals that are sent by our country and our government. And I think it's really important that the current administration step up their efforts to assure people who are coming here from Honduras and El Salvador and Guatemala and Mexico, places like that, that they need to follow the law. I mean, we are a nation of immigrants. I fit into that category, at least my grandparents did, but we're a nation of laws, and those are not mutually exclusive. You can be both. We do need a better permanent policy made by the Congress, which hopefully we'll see some activity on, but in the meantime, there were a number of policies that the previous administration had put in place that were reversed by the current administration when they took office. And I think many of those changes have contributed to the message that we send to people across the border. And it's gotten so bad now that 50% of the Border Patrol is spending their time caring for kids in these facilities as opposed to policing the border, which is what we want them to do. There are lots of bad actors down there, cartels, smugglers, human traffickers that are trying to get across all the time and bring some of that stuff into the country. And if the Border Patrol, 50% of the manpower that should be policing the border and protecting us from those types of influences, are spending their time taking care of unaccompanied children in some of these facilities where literally are packed in. I mean, these conditions are deplorable, and it breaks your heart to look into the eyes of these kids, and particularly little kids, and see the conditions that they're being held in right now. The point is, we don't have the capacity for this. We are swamped, we are overwhelmed, and we need a change in direction in terms of the policies. One of the things that I will say, and you hear a lot of discussion around the border wall, and the current administration suspended funding for the wall. Constructing the walls is critically important to the Border Patrol's ability to keep security at the border, and they made that very clear to us, that it's not just about stopping the flow, but it's also slowing it down. If they slow it down enough, they can catch people, and the wall helps them to do that. So I think that's an important part of our border security strategy. I think the Remain in Mexico policy, which the current administration changed from the previous administration, is also something that kept those that were seeking asylum in Mexico until their cases could be heard and adjudicated. Now they're all coming across the border, getting into this country. We can't process them fast enough, so they're being released. So you've got a lot of families, kids being released into communities that don't have the capacity to deal with it, and a good number of which are COVID carriers too. So it's just a real mess right now, and it needs clear focus, clear-eyed focus by the administration. I hope they'll jump on this and put some policies in place that will help slow or stop the flow, and then I think we can have a broader discussion about how we deal with this challenge going forward.
Great. You brought up investment in wall. Let's segue to infrastructure, because that's something we're planning to learn more about later this week. Our understanding at this point is somewhere up to $3 trillion. It may be in two components. This is on top of the $1.9 trillion that was just recently passed in terms of COVID relief. What can you tell us about this? Has the Republican Party been involved? And what can we expect as South Dakotans in terms of infrastructure spending or investment coming our way?
Well, infrastructure historically, in the time I've been in Congress, and I've been working on this issue since I was a freshman congressman. We did the highway bill that year in 1998, and I've been involved with every highway bill since. I try to get on the committees that are relevant to South Dakota. Infrastructure is very relevant to South Dakota. We've got an economy that depends upon moving freight, particularly agricultural commodities. And so infrastructure historically has been a bipartisan issue. It's been an issue that both sides kind of can work together on, and it should be that way again. What the administration is talking about doing, and the Democrats on the Hill are talking about doing, is a massive investment, not a highway bill type investment or a broadband type investment, but they're talking about $3 trillion, as you mentioned. And so far, we've not been read into any of that. There's not been an effort on the part of the leadership in the Senate or the White House to engage Republicans. I hope there will be, because like I said, I think there are areas of agreement, but much of what they're talking about doing are things that are kind of like the COVID bill, unrelated to the issue. I expect that there'll be a heavy concentration on the Green New Deal, the climate agenda that the Democrats have will be included in infrastructure bill. And I hope that as we look at what we can do to strengthen our transportation system, modernize our telecommunications system, continue to invest in high-speed internet services, broadband services for all areas of the country, that will be the focus, and not a lot of unrelated and ancillary items that might be part of their agenda, but don't deal specifically with infrastructure. And I think we have to think really in terms of targeting now, too. The virus bill was a $2 trillion bill, and only about 10% was related to the virus. It was a lot of other stuff. And if you look at how much we spent now on the pandemic, it's pretty much eye-popping. The first CARES bill last year was about $3 trillion. We've done subsequent bills, add another trillion to that. This last $2 trillion puts us at about $6 trillion, all borrowed. All of that goes on the debt, every dollar that we're spending. And in March of last year, we didn't know what we had here. People were scared. We needed to provide calm to the markets. We needed to provide calm to people. There was a lot of fear. So we went big, we went bold. We did some things probably that many of us were uncomfortable doing, but it was what we felt was necessary at the time. Now, a year later, we're in a different place. We've had an opportunity to see a vaccine or multiple vaccines now be developed. They're being distributed. People are getting the vaccine. The economy is coming back pretty well. And so the amount of spending that's being talked about is, in my view, way above and beyond what is necessary. I think the economy is going to do really well this year. The Congressional Budget Office, all the analysts tell us that we're going to grow at 3.7% if Congress does nothing. And they said that before the $1.9 trillion bill. But I'm concerned that if we don't do targeted things, if we just kind of keep throwing money out there, at some point those chickens come home to roost. And you cannot continue to borrow money like we're borrowing money and not expect at some point that there's going to be a consequence to that. And the Fed chairman I had a conversation with him last week, and I've asked him this question about money supply and inflation and interest rates, and they kind of take a different view than he used to take on that subject based on where conditions are today. And they're supposed to watch inflation, but my view is at least that the economic consequence long term of this unabated borrowing policy and racking up more and more debt eventually will lead to higher interest rates. It will lead to higher inflation, which impacts consumers' budgets, families' budgets, and certainly would swamp us at the federal level, because our fiscal picture right now really depends upon low interest rates. The amount of borrowing that we're doing, the debt service that we have, is manageable because interest rates are so low. If they started to normalize, we'd be in a world of hurt. And I think we have to think long and hard when we make decisions about how we invest, and do it strategically in areas that we need to target, but don't just be, kind of using this as an opportunity to fulfill a long list of, in many cases, what I think are liberal priorities.
Sounds like we're going to learn more on.
And there's be a lot of tax increases too, just for purposes of what the administration is talking about is not only raising the corporate tax rate on C corps to back up to 28, but also raising rates on high-income Americans, which includes a lot of pass-throughs. Most pass-through companies pay at the individual tax rate, and so when tax rates go up on high-income earners, it hits a lot of those small businesses that are organized as pass-throughs. They're talking about snapping back the death tax to where it was, which have a profound impact on agriculture. They're talking about reversing the international rules on taxation. We had a couple of new taxes, minimum taxes called BEAT and GILTI, that were part of the 2017 tax reform bill. And so they're talking about a huge rollback of tax policy, which I could think could be very harmful to an economic recovery and actually work at cross purposes with the very thing that they're trying to achieve with this.
I'm going to come back to a couple things that you mentioned. You mentioned the new Green Deal, agriculture, prices increasing. Let's talk about energy policy. It's been well documented, the impacts of the Keystone XL pipeline. We're a state that is big on biofuels. What can you tell us about the current administration's energy policy and what that has already meant or will mean for South Dakotans?
I think that for me at least, and I will tell you, I think everybody knows, I am a huge believer in renewable energy. There has not been anybody who's been more active on biofuels or wind energy in the United States Senate, maybe with the exception of Chuck Grassley. So I just say that as that South Dakota, we are doing our part to make sure that we're making good decisions, not only for our economy, but for the environment and to deal with the issue of climate and everything else. So I'm a big believer in renewables. But I also recognize that the future that we're going to live in, at least in the near term, is going to consist of the need for some of the more traditional sources of energy. And when the president, on the first day he was in office, canceled the Keystone Pipeline, that was not only a huge shot economically to South Dakota and some of the jobs that come with it, and I will tell you as somebody, who I think, as you know, is a native of Jones County, was depending on that. Significant amount of tax revenue coming off of the pipeline that goes to the school district in a rural area that's struggling to survive. And the rural electric cooperative was going to provide the power for it. There were going to be some construction jobs, some permanent jobs associated with it, and that's true of a lot of the counties in western South Dakota. But more importantly is an important link in moving fluids, transportation to get energy to the places and the markets where it's needed. And you've got to have that, and the most efficient way to move oil is through a pipeline. It is safer, by far. It is more efficient and more economical to do it that way than to put it on a rail car, or put it on a truck, put it on the highway, put it on a railroad where we've seen derailments with that, and that has tremendous consequences. So it makes no sense to me to completely shift course, knowing that the country is in a period of transition and it's going to take a while. We're not going to be fully able to operate on renewable sources of energy in the near term. And the other thing we saw in Texas, obviously, too, is that if you put all your eggs in the basket of power sources that are intermittent, if you don't have base load power, if you don't have firm power, you can be in a world of hurt. And so we have to have those sources of power. Coal-fired electricity is base load power, it's firm power. At some point, hopefully, we'll figure out how to store energy, and when we do, we'll be able to store some of the energy sources that are intermittent so that they can be used at times when there's peak demand. But we need all those sources of energy available to us, and I think the current administration has been pushed so hard by the far left in their political party toward this Green New Deal and toward the issue of climate change that what they're trying to do, to me, is just not realistic. And I think you have to be practical, you have to be realistic, you have to make decisions based upon common sense and an understanding that we can have the long-term plan, but in the near term, we've got to be wise about how we do this. And it does have economic consequences because not only does it cost jobs, but it also raises power rates for people in areas of the country that are very dependent upon some of the more traditional sources of energy. So I think an all-of-the-above energy strategy is still what we ought to be looking for. I'm grateful that we have developed energy sources now so that we aren't dependent as much on foreign energy. I think that was a huge move in the right direction. But we're taking steps backwards, in my view, if we're really interested in being energy independent and having energy sources that are reliable at the time when you need them the most.
Yeah, thank you. I want to pivot a bit. Have to ask. In the past 2 weeks, our nation has experienced 2 horrific mass killing events. One in Atlanta, one in Boulder. And according to Gun Violence Archives, in the first 81 days of this year, so through last Tuesday, our country has experienced 103 mass shootings. And they define that as 4 more people shot, not including the victim, in the same incident in roughly the same time or place. What can be done to avoid this? And then do you support any form of gun restrictions?
Well, I mean, I think I did in 2018. We passed a bill called the Fix NICS Act, the National Instant Check System, and we made some changes in that expanded background checks. We tried to get more information. We tried to get the various entities of our government that maintain some of these databases to integrate those to work together so that if somebody goes in to buy a firearm, a weapon someplace, and they're on the FBI's list, but not on, or maybe they were on one of the military lists, which is what happened in the shooting in the church in Texas. But the Air Force hadn't passed that over, so it wasn't on the NICS list. That to try and get those put together in a way so that we have a more comprehensive view of who are threats out there. I think that doing something in the area of mental health is really important. Almost every one of these shooters has serious mental health issues. And there are a number of states that have adopted red flag laws. There's a lot of talk about red flag laws. Red flag laws, I think, and Colorado had one, obviously, and it didn't stop the shooting in Boulder. But I do think that if you're going to pass the red flag laws, you've got to have robust due process so that people, if they are wrongly named or somebody lies about somebody else, there's got to be some laws in place for perjury as well. But there are a number of things that are being talked about. What I would say about this subject, however, is that you can't just attack the most sort of shiniest object and say, we're going to do this because we want to respond if it doesn't address the underlying problem. And a lot of the solutions that get proposed are directed at banning certain types of firearms or certain ammunition or magazines and clips and that sort of thing. And a lot of that stuff is they're shiny objects, but they don't address the fundamental issue, and that is that we've got a lot of people in this country, many of them with mental health issues, who are getting access to firearms who shouldn't have access to firearms. And I think to me it's focusing more on the person pulling the trigger than on the inanimate object that they're using. I am opposed to, obviously, any attempts to restrict a law-abiding person's freedom when it comes to their Second Amendment rights. And so I look very carefully at, is this going to do anything? Would this have prevented this from happening? Would this have prevented this particular shooting from happening? And a lot of times they'll say, well, the background check, it's about the background check. Well, a lot of times these guys are passing background checks and they're getting access to firearms. There's always an attempt to try and expand those. I don't have a problem with commercial sales if you want to expand background checks, but I do think that if I want to sell my 12 gauge to one of my grandkids at some point, that I shouldn't have to go to a dealer to do that. I think there are certain things, again, that you just have to apply common sense and my dad used to say, good old-fashioned horse sense to, and I think that's the way to approach this issue. It's a tough issue, but too often we focus on the firearm and not on the person behind it.
Yeah, thank you. And the issue is not going away, and it's accelerating, if anything, it seems. And I know a lot of folks are looking to DC to solve that issue, but it's not probably a one solution approach. Let's talk about the Republican Party. Of course, we had a change in administration here in November and into January. I think anybody would argue that President Trump still has significant influence within the party. I guess my question for you, heading into 2022 midterm elections is, how would you define the party, and who's in charge?
Okay. Well, we are an entrepreneurial party. So, you know, I'd like to think that we're a party that's more ground up than top down. But, you know, clearly, former President Trump has had a lot of influence in our party and continues to, with respect to the 2022 elections, appear at least to have an interest in continuing to have that influence. But I guess what I would say is, and I came of age politically about the time Ronald Reagan was coming on the political stage. And so, you know, my views of government leadership a lot when it comes to public life are shaped by the way that he conducted himself in office. And he was a guy who wasn't afraid to draw sharp lines, but he also had an incredible sense of optimism and humor, which he used effectively, I think, to talk about the differences between our system of government and other systems of government around the world. But, you know, I view myself as a right-of-center conservative. But I'm somebody who realizes that to solve problems, you have to figure out how to work with people who have a different point of view. I think right now the political parties, both sides, frankly, for that matter, have been pulled hard in the sort of away from the middle, more toward the right and the left. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with outside groups' influence, the influence of social media, online fundraising. You know, now it's all about litmus tests and that sort of thing, and I think that makes it difficult to put up a record of accomplishment, because at least in the Senate, you know, historically, most solutions are found in the middle. You know, you have to find common ground because it takes 60 votes, which is another issue if we get into the issue of the filibuster.
We'll get there.
But my party, at least the way I view my party, and we are a limited but effective government. Used to be, I hope still are in the future, fiscally responsible party that believes in economic freedom, personal freedom, coupled with individual responsibility. We believe in peace through strength. You've got to maintain a strong military if you want to continue to protect not only the American people, but hopefully promote democracy around the world. We're a pro-life party. I mean, there are lots of things that I think are defining principles of the Republican Party, which in my view still speak to the majority of Americans. And I will tell you this, and I'm sure we got lots of different political perspectives in the audience, but I believe that the country is still right of center. And it doesn't always vote that way, and sometimes that has to do with the people, the candidates for office, and how they articulate their messages. But I don't think people want a Green New Deal, open borders, federalized elections, attacks on the Second Amendment type policies. I just think that people in this country, for the most part, tend to be pretty practical, and they want to see you try and solve problems. They're concerned about economic issues, pocketbook issues. They want to know what you're going to do to provide a better opportunity for their kids and their futures, and hopefully some retirement security. And so I think a lot of what we talk about are economic issues. We want to be the party of growth. We want to be the party of jobs, and the party of a better and brighter and more prosperous and hopefully more free future. And so it's about, to me, the ideas. Mm-hmm. It's about the principles. It's not about personalities. Yes, personalities help articulate those principles, and policies in some cases shape them in a certain direction. I like the fact that President Trump did bring in a lot of blue-collar union workers into our party, and he appealed to them. It was more of a populist message, had to do with some trade issues and things like that. And what I would like to see our party do in the future is figure out how to knit together a coalition of, the traditional right-of-center Republicans that I talked about on those values, and then figure out how to speak to people who maybe, the world has moved past them and haven't had the economic opportunities that some of the rest of us have had. And I think there's a powerful coalition there if somebody can grab it and run with it. But the parties constantly are redefining and evolving, and part of that shaped by the personalities that are the candidates for office at the time. But to me, it does come back to a core set of principles and values and ideas. That's what grounds me as a Republican. That's why I subscribed to it. At the time, there was somebody who was carrying that mantle who did it very, very well and articulated it in a way that really appealed to me as a young person who, hadn't up until that point been that interested in politics. And I hope that that's the kind of leadership that we can see more of in the future, and those types of candidates will emerge and run for office.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Let's stay on former President Trump. It's no secret that you received some criticism late last year. You were, and this is after you came in and said that any challenge to the election results would go down like a shot dog in the Senate. He responded emphatically via Twitter when he still had access to Twitter. And I'm not going to read the entire tweet, but he said, and he was talking about you, he will be primaried in 2020, political career over. Maybe talk about the relationship. You talked about some of the things that President Trump did, but maybe talk about that relationship, how you respond to that, and then is he a potential candidate for the 2024 election?
He's probably a candidate if he wants to be, and he still commands a big following out there, and we're respectful of that. The ironic thing about the relationship I have with the president is I'm the person in the Senate that was tasked with moving his agenda. All those judges that we got through, all the legislative things that we did, I had to help pass his agenda through the Senate, and I think I voted with him somewhere on the order of 90 to 95% of the time. So I think that trying to define somebody as, the president likes to use the word rhino as a Republican in name only. He uses that, it's basically how loyal you are to him 100% of the time. And so anyway, my point is I support a lot of the policies, and I've made that very clear. The way that he delivers his message is something that, yes, I've been critical of. But what I was trying to convey, and maybe in an inartful way, in the metaphor that I used, was that a challenge in the Senate on the 2020 election wasn't going to go anywhere. I mean, I know every vote in the Senate on our side, and you weren't going to get a single Democrat vote. He was going to get a few, and we knew that, but the president doesn't like to lose. And so I was trying to send a message that, look, if you do this, you're not going to prevail, and probably could have done it in a kinder, gentler way. But that was the point of that. And after you've had an election, and after you've had recounts, and after you've had audits, and after you've had 60 lawsuits, and after all the states have certified their elections, and after you've had the Electoral College meet and validate that, to me, the election's over. And that's what our Constitution calls for. That's what our laws call for. And I had no reason to believe, based on anything I had seen, evidence, that shouldn't be the case. And so, my job I believe, is to speak the truth. And I know sometimes it was unpopular. There were a lot of people who had a lot invested in the president's success. And clearly, there's a big difference between his policies and Joe Biden's policies, which is what we're talking about right now. But you have to respect the will of the voters. The American people spoke. In every state in the country, they all certified in accordance with the law and on time. And the role of Congress in a situation like that, under the Constitution and under the law, is very limited. It's largely ministerial. It's basically to count the votes and then report it out. And that's what I viewed our job to be, and that's what most of my colleagues viewed our job to be. So, once it's litigated, it's over. And at some point, you have to say it's over. That's how our democracy functions, and you have to be able to move on. And so we had a disagreement about that. He felt strongly about it. That's fine. It's a free country, and he is welcome to articulate his view, but it doesn't change the way I see the issue and the way that I wanted to speak about it, not only nationally, but here to people in South Dakota, many of whom I should say disagree with me.
Yeah. Thank you. Let's stay on voting. Late last week, Georgia Republican Governor Brian Kemp signed into law a voter reform bill. There's been similar legislation brought in other states throughout the country. Critics have labeled that Jim Crow 2.0. In light of what you said about our most recent election, that there was a lack of evidence in terms of that, how do you foresee these measures? Helpful in terms of ensuring integrity, or divisive in terms of potentially making it tougher for some to vote?
Well, I mean, I think that, Georgia, of course, is an interesting case because it got so much attention late because of those 2 Senate races. And so that was, the election essentially in Georgia didn't go until November the 3rd. It went until January the 5th. And so there was an extra 2 months there that we had to talk about all this stuff. And for people who, thought that the election had been stolen in Georgia, I just ask them to just ask yourself this question. You had a Republican governor, a Republican Secretary of State, a Republican Attorney General, a Republican Senate and Republican House. You had, I believe 3 recounts when it was all said and done. Do you really think that all those people were colluding with the Biden campaign to throw the election to Biden? Some things just don't pass the smell test. But they were under a lot of scrutiny, and so I think coming out of the election, there's a lot of pressure on them to, take a look at their election system, which they did, and they did some things that, for example, they expanded early vote. So they're actually going to make early vote more days, so people can vote even earlier than before. I believe as part of this, they required photo ID, which 29 states have. We have it here in South Dakota. I think that makes sense. They also did some things that were really strange, like not allowing people to give people in a line water. I mean, I have no idea why that's part of their election. Although my understanding is they don't want people giving gifts to voters, but giving somebody a bottle of water doesn't seem like it passes that. But I guess the point is, states are going to do things on an ongoing basis to clean up and hopefully make their elections more resilient and less apt to create the conditions that are favorable to fraud. And so I'm perfectly fine with the system we have today, where states have the preeminent role in administering elections. The Democrats with H.R. 1 want to change that. They want to federalize elections in this country. I would think that most people in South Dakota would have a lot more confidence in our state officials than they would in some bureaucracy in Washington when it comes to running our elections. But different states are going to do it slightly differently. But I just think that automatically, instinctively, and this is what the left does, saying this is Jim Crow, this is racist. It just doesn't. Again, that doesn't add anything to the public debate. And they're doing that in Washington right now with respect to the filibuster. All of a sudden, the legislative filibuster, which 33 Democrats wrote a letter on 2 years ago saying they supported, now they say it's racist and it's a Jim Crow, basically part of the history. And the fact of the matter, it isn't. It just isn't. That's just false, and they know it. And I just wish that wouldn't be what instinctively people try to make this stuff about. I mean, let's have a conversation about the facts. Let's have a conversation about the differences and the disagreements we have with respect to the issues. If a state wants to have a photo ID law, we can talk about that and whether or not that's an effective way of ensuring that people don't vote multiple times in an election. There are lots of things you can talk about, but don't instinctively just go to the issue of race. That just does not, it's not true. There isn't any law that the South Dakota legislature makes about our elections that is racist. I mean, I think everybody wants to have clean elections. Everybody wants to have confidence in their elections. Everybody wants to have trust in their elections. It's an institution that is foundational, fundamental to American democracy, and it needs to work. And we need to make sure that it does. But it just doesn't enhance or elevate the discussion to make it about that.
Thank you. And I do want to come back to, you mentioned democracy and where we're at as a country. I want to come back to that. But first, before we do, you brought up another issue that I want to get to. It's got a lot of conversation around the filibuster. Going back to Harry Reid, Obama administration, that was removed to confirm executive and judicial nominees. Last administration removed it for Supreme Court nominees, and now there's talk about doing away with it completely. I'm going to juxtapose that for us. Regardless of the party that seems to be in power, there's questions as to when that should be removed. Talk about the pros and cons, and how do you see this playing out?
Well, with 2 or 3 exceptions, judicial nominations, executive branch nominations weren't filibustered up until about 2000. That changed, and just in the last 2 decades. But judges historically were confirmed, and you know, with simple majority votes, they weren't filibustered. That changed about 2000, and then even President Obama filibustered Judge Alito on the Supreme Court. But so the executive calendar, which is judicial and executive branch nominations, essentially went back to what it was pre-2000 when Reed pulled the trigger in 2013 on district and appellate court judges. And then knowing full well that when they did that when we got the majority back, we were probably going to finish it and apply it to Supreme Court justices. And so that happened. A lot of Democrats have said, privately and publicly, they regret voting in 2013 to change that, because it led to 3 Supreme Court justices that they didn't like, you know. And so now we have Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett on the Supreme Court. And so I guess I point that out simply to say that power shifts back and forth. And something that you do today for a short-term gain is probably going to create some long-term pain. We could have gotten rid of the filibuster. We had the majority the last 6 years. And for the last 4 years, President Trump was constantly on us about eliminating the filibuster. 34 times Trump tweeted or made public statements attacking Senate Republicans for not doing away with the filibuster. And we didn't do it. We could have done it, but because we wanted to pass stuff too. He wanted to pass his agenda. But you know, we believe that it's important that the institution of the Senate be that institution designed by our founders to be the place that requires deliberation, cooperation, compromise, and that's why we have 6-year terms. That's why there's only 100 of us as opposed to 435 in the House. It's designed to create the conditions that are favorable to good legislation, and that isn't reactive to what's happening, you know, immediately reacting to what's happening in the electorate. So, and again, the heritage of the filibuster goes back to Thomas Jefferson. I mean, it was, everybody says, well, it was used to Jim Crow. No. The filibuster was first used, if you look at it historically, on the issue of where D.C. ought to be located. It was used on the censure of President Andrew Jackson. It was used on the creation of a national bank, to stop the creation of a national bank. The filibuster has been used historically, didn't have anything to do in its origin with Jim Crow or racism. And so again, I mean, it's just, you have to debunk some of that history. But more importantly, in the last 4 years during the Trump administration, it was used prolifically by the Democrats to stop his agenda. And now all of a sudden, they have the majority, and we're 2 months into it. We haven't filibustered a single bill yet in the Senate, and that they're attacking the Republicans for abusing the filibuster. It's like, what? So, you know, I mean, I think that you either have to, if you look at this issue, and if you're somebody who thinks that it ought to be just pure majoritarian rule in this country, you're probably okay with eliminating the filibuster. If you believe, as the founders did, according to the Federalist Papers, that the institution of the Senate was designed to be different, and to be that check and balance, and to be that voice for the rights of the minority, and to be the place where that required some level of cooperation. You know, I was a member of the House of Representatives. The House it's simple majority. There's a Rules Committee. The Rules Committee tells you what bills can come to the floor, what amendments are made in order, how much time is allowed for debate on each amendment. It's a very structured, organized process. The Senate was not designed to work that way. And that's the heritage of the Senate. And so if you want to do away with it now, then it's going to come back to bite you in the future. My first year in the Senate in 2005, there were 2 issues that the Democrats filibustered. We had the majority for my first 2 years in the Senate. Medical malpractice reform. It got 58 votes in the Senate, but didn't get 60. Democrats hated it, loathed it. and ANWR, development of oil on the North Slope of Alaska, got 58 votes in the Senate. Democrats hated it. I had a concealed carry bill in 2009 that they filibustered, got 58 votes in the Senate. Democrats hated it. And they were able to stop that stuff because of the 60-vote requirement. Those are all things that at 51, if we get the majority back, boom, you could pass in a New York minute. And I just think right now, they want to pass the Green New Deal. They want to pass they want to federalize elections. They've got this very ambitious agenda, DC statehood among other things, that they want to do. But just remember that you reap what you sow. And in the Senate, you ought to think about the long game. You need to think about, it's the one place with 6-year terms, we ought to think about the country. And so doing away with the legislative filibuster, and I say that as somebody who, when I got to the Senate as a House member, was so annoyed with that. You know, it was so hard to get things done, and I just hated it. And I would have probably voted in 2005 to get rid of the legislative filibuster. But as you understand the role of the Senate in our democracy and the important place that it has in terms of our legislative process, you come to a view that this was there for a reason, and you understand what the founders were thinking. And I just think it'd be a big mistake to go away from that.
Yeah, thank you. And it sounds like, at least right now, potentially there are a couple votes short of that Manchin and Senator.
I've been mowing Joe Manchin's yard, but right now there are 2 Democrats and more, but not willing to say it publicly, who are willing to say publicly and emphatically that I'm not going to do this. And I appreciate that because they are defending the institution. And this, again, this is not about short-term gain. This is about the country. And the Democrats would argue, and the Republicans would argue too, both would argue that how horrible the other side is and how they misuse this, but it has over time, I think, served us well. And the big things that have happened in the country are durable over time because they were done with bipartisan majorities and not by one-party rule. And I think if you do it with one-party rule, you're going to rue the day when the other side gets the majority because it's going to come back to bite you.
Yeah. Thank you. Let's talk about the state, our democracy, and I also we'll talk about events of January 6th. But let's start with just where we're at as a country. We're 68 days into the Biden administration. He ran on a platform of unification. Talk about where we're at today and how do we move forward from here?
I knew Joe Biden when he was a senator, and I do think, and by the way, Biden made long speeches. Biden was great at filibustering, and Biden made speeches in support of the filibuster as a senator. He's got a different view now, and I think that you can't have if you on something that fundamental, that foundational, you can't just, that's not a view you can evolve with and change over time. But the point is, when he became president, yes, he talked in his inaugural speech about unifying the country. I think he's a good person. He's a man of faith, and I do believe he wants to do good and right by the country. But I also believe that he is being pulled hard by his staff, by the leadership on Capitol Hill, by the Bernie Sanders wing of the party, which I think is ascendant in Democrat politics today. And the Bernie Sanders wing of the party is got a very far left view of the world and of the country and what's good for the country. And so I hope that the president will come to the conclusion that at some point he needs to engage with Republicans. I haven't heard from him since he was sworn in. Mitch McConnell hasn't heard from him since he was sworn in, the Republican leader in the United States Senate. And so the fact that there hasn't been any outreach or attempt to negotiate a bipartisan agreement or compromise on any major issue, to me suggests that he's not listening to the right people. And so I hope that at some point they will start to engage, and maybe the infrastructure bill is a place where they do that. I hope so. But we will see, and I think we do need to unite the country, but part of it is up to us too, in the way that we conduct ourselves, for example, on social media platforms. I mean, there is so much divisiveness and hatred out there, and it's gotten so toxic and personal. on a lot of these social media platforms. And the media now is a lot more commentary and opinion than it is news. You know, true journalism is kind of gone by the wayside now. And, you know, if you're a Republican, you watch Fox, and if you're a Democrat, you watch MSNBC or CNN. And if you listen to those shows, I mean, it's all about ratings, it's about clicks, it's about eyeballs, it's about money. And true journalism has become a lost art. And so people ask me, where do they go to get, you know, if they want to get real good, accurate news? And I usually tell them their local news, because it's a lot more, if you turn on the cable nets now, and social media has amplified that. And the reason social media is so dangerous, and I know everybody here is probably on some social media platform and probably has their own, but social media is dangerous because the tech companies who manage those platforms are feeding you what you want to hear over and over and over again, because they want you to stay on the platform. That's how they monetize it, with advertising. And so the more time you spend on that platform, the more opportunity they have to sell you whatever it is they're trying to sell you online. And so the algorithms that they use, if you click on something on a particular website, they're going to start feeding you that same information. And so pretty soon, nobody's getting new information. Everybody is getting everybody is getting reinforced that which they already believe, or what the tech company thinks they want to hear based on that algorithm. It's artificial intelligence, and most people, if we're on those things for very long, we are being manipulated by the tech companies, and that creates this sort of spiral of information. And I think a lot of these people who commit these random acts of violence that you see, they dwell on this stuff. I mean, they get on these websites that are inciting and encouraging some of that kind of behavior. And I'm not saying it's not a powerful tool and it can't be used well. It's connected us in a way that, in particularly during the pandemic. But I just want you, as you approach this stuff, and I've got several bills to address this, that they have to tell you when they are using, artificial intelligence or algorithms to manipulate you. Because I just think that happens on a daily basis. And so you just need to be aware and try and get other sources of information. Don't read the same thing every day. You know, diversify a little bit where you get information. You know, I read the Wall Street Journal. I think the Wall Street Journal editorial page is sort of, if you're a center-right conservative, that's kind of the place where center-right conservatives go. That's the dogma. But I read the New York Times. I read the Washington Post. I read the local news here in South Dakota. And you know, if you go to a conservative website, you know, maybe go to a right-of-center website, not a far-right website. I mean, I'm just saying, be discerning. And then when you conduct yourself on social media platforms, if you're tweeting at somebody, think about it. You know, don't just react and put down the first thing that comes into your mind, because, you know, that's why Abraham Lincoln always wrote letters and put them in his desk and went and slept on it, never sent them. Sometimes we do things in emotion, and it really has coarsened the discourse that we have as a country. Yeah. That's a long...
No, that's all right. And you're a ranking member of the telecom subcommittee, so we'll look forward to what, that's been a big discussion, and I know you've had leaders from those various big tech firms there, so we'll watch to see what comes of that. You brought up violence, you brought up incitement. We've got to talk about January 6th. Tell us about your experience there, and then what percentage of the responsibility do you put on our former president for the events of that day?
Well, I mean, I don't think the speech in and of itself, you can't blame the speech in and of itself, but I think everything leading up to it. You know, the constant denial of election results and trying to convince people that it had been stolen and that it was fraudulent and all that. At some point, when you've exhausted all the legal remedies and you have to say, okay, you know, it's over. I lost an election, a close election in South Dakota back in 2002. I had a lot of pressure from a lot of people, both here and nationally, to do the recount, to go after it, you know, challenge it, go to court, all that kind of stuff. And I have a different view of things. I just believe that if it was supposed to be, it would have been. And, you know, you live to fight another day. But, you know, everybody approaches these issues differently. But I think that you know, what happened on January 6th, and yes, I was on the floor, we were debating this, the crowd came in, they broke through the perimeter, and then they got into the building. And pretty soon, they're pulling Pence out of the chair. Grassley goes up there, adjourns us. My security detail pulls me, and we run out of the building, and I'm going down this stairway, and there's this hallway where you come into the Capitol, the front doors, and they had it barricaded, and there were just people just jammed in there. And I just remember looking at it before we went down the stairway, down the back stairway to get to the tunnel that goes out of the Capitol. This big guy with long gray hair screaming profanities at me. And he recognized me, and so I won't even repeat what he was saying. But this was an angry mob. I mean, this was not a passive group who was just, you know, here to express their support for our democratic process. This was an angry mob. And so, you know, and clearly they were trying to do harm to people like Mike Pence. And I'd say it's just a sad day. It really is. It's a tragic day in American history, and frankly, in my view, again, unnecessary, provoked by people who spent a lot of time on social media platforms and kind of everybody got ginned up and decided we're going to go do this. And I think the 2 months from November 3rd to January 6th, where the election continued to be contested, poured gasoline on the fire. And so I don't believe the president's speech that day saying, you know, we're going to fight. Lots of politicians say that. You know, go up to the Capitol, make your views known. Lots of people do that. Protest is part of our First Amendment right under the Constitution. But spreading falsehoods about, you know, election results and you know, encouraging people to come there in the first place, knowing full well what the limited role was for the United States Congress when it comes to elections. I told you earlier, the Constitution spells out very clearly. Mike Lee, who was a Supreme Court clerk for Justice Alito, is probably our best constitutional expert. And we were down the well of the Senate in the days leading up to this, and he was walking us through the Constitution and what it says about the role of Congress in elections. And the law that flows from it is an 1877 law, but it clearly prescribes that, what our role is. And it's largely ministerial. If there had been some dispute, if states had submitted different electoral ballots, but none of the states did. The states all submitted their certifications on time in accordance with the law. So the role of Congress, purely and simply, was to count. And so there were just misrepresentations about what Congress could do or what the vice president could do. And once you get that out there, and they weren't making that argument in court, they were making it on social media. And once that information gets out there and goes viral, it encourages people to do a lot of things that they probably wouldn't otherwise do. And so it's a sad chapter in American history, entirely preventable, and I hope never happens again.
Thank you. Let's turn to your political future. It's some senator, you're coming up on the home stretch of your third term. Thank you for almost 2 decades of service to our state and to our country. Coming up on midterm elections, I think you became a grandfather for the 5th time. I had a milestone birthday here recently. What does your future hold heading into next November?
We'll see. I mean, you know, the elections, in my view, start way too early. And we had Senate elections, if you can believe this, the North Carolina Senate election all in this 2020 cost $296 million. Lindsey Graham, in his South Carolina election, raised $70 million online from small donors. And so these elections have just become perpetual. And I don't think perpetual elections is good for the country. And so I told people, and it's true, I'm going to focus on the work. I've always done that. And I think that if you do the work well, do the job, the politics eventually kind of takes care of itself. I have never announced for office, any office, I don't think, and in all the time I've been in office, prior to, in fact, I didn't announce one of my Senate races until January of the election year. But I just think that, keep your head down, stay in your lane, do the work, and we'll make those decisions. In the end, it's a personal decision. It's something you have to sit down with your wife and your family and figure out what makes sense. And my wife has paid, she's for 25 years, I've been going back and forth to Washington, D.C. And, that's been a lot of alone time for her, especially now that the kids are gone. She has some grandkids around, which helps. But, you have to, those are factors that you take into consideration. And you want to, this is not about, you want to do it to make a difference. And that's why I got into public life in the first place. I saw it as a place where you could do some good things, make a difference, and I still view it that way. So we'll make something official probably later in the year.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, thank you for that. Thanks for being here today. Absolutely.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Rotary. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
Thanks again.
David, thanks, buddy. Appreciate
Thanks
it.
again for being here today, and thank you, Rotarians, for joining us. Join us back next week. We'll have a panel discussion around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So look forward to seeing you then. Thank you.
Senator, thank you for joining us today. These are certainly serious subjects, and these are serious times. So thank you for your leadership, and thank you for joining us today. Please join us next week, an important conversation on workforce diversity, equity, and inclusion. Thank you, everybody. This meeting is adjourned.